Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is my first video ever. I'm really excited about it. It's a birthday book haul. It was my birthday recently and a lot of people in my life know I like books, so unsurprisingly I received a lot of books as presents. There's around 14 books in this video which I'm going to talk to you about today, and I've sectioned them into 4 categories. They're not super accurate categories and all the books don't fit into these categories very well, but just for some form of order to the video, the categories are just general fiction, classics, non-fiction, and children's literature / books for a younger audience. So with all of that being said, let's get started with the general fiction. So I've put 2 fantasy books in this category as well because there was nowhere else for them to go, so we'll start with those. The first book I received was The House in the Cerulean Sea. It's essentially about this guy who, I believe he's with like some sort of ministry that oversees magical creatures or something of that nature. And so he's given an assignment to go to this home for troubled or magical children. I believe troubled and magical are synonymous in this case. So he goes there and I believe he has to shut down the institution or something like that. I believe he develops some sort of bond with these children and it's actually quite heartwarming. So I'm excited to read that. A lot of people say it's in like that cozy fantasy genre, which I'm excited to get into. Then another quite popular one that I received is Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell. So this one's by Susanna Clarke, who you might know because of Piranesi. This one's a fantasy about 2 magicians, Jonathan Strange, I keep saying Doctor Strange, thinking of the Marvel character. But anyway, Jonathan Strange, so he's the more like classical, traditional magician. And then Mr. Norrell is sort of a newer magician who has sort of different techniques of magic to Jonathan Strange. And I believe it's about sort of like a rivalry, but also companionship between the two. And the book is written in somewhat of an academic way with like footnotes and things throughout. I am intimidated to read this given how big it is, but I will get to it maybe in the fall or something like that. I feel like that could be the right sort of vibe. And I have this one, which is Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I read another book by this author a few years ago, Americana, which was, I thought the writing was really good. I think she's definitely a talented author. It's just, I don't know if that particular story was for me. I couldn't really get along with the main character of that novel. I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of the decisions they made, but I'm hoping this one is different. I believe we followed 3 different viewpoints that kind of interweave together. One of a houseboy, another of a mistress, and the third of an Englishman. This book is set in Nigeria, I believe before or maybe during the Biafran Wars, and I believe it talks to themes of racism, colonialism, and the impact of that on Africa. So I'm really excited to read this one. I think the thing I look for the most in a book is for something to transport me to a different place. And so I love reading about books in Africa, Asia, South America, North America, anywhere really. Like that's far away from where I am. Then I'm gonna move on to classics. So the first one I got is Edgar Allan Poe's selection of short stories and poems. I believe these are sort of gothic tales. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, I believe, is a famous one. I've heard about the Cask of Amontillado, The Telltale Heart. And so yeah, super excited about it. I don't read a lot of short stories or poems, so this could be a good introduction, and I quite like gothic themed stories, things that are a little bit creepy, scare me a bit. So I think this would be a great one to read in October, around the fall time. The second classic I got was Corregidora by Gail Jones. This is one I actually saw by chance while I was at bookstore. I read the blurb and it just really drew me in. So I was lucky enough to get it as a present. Where is the blurb? Oh, at the back. So it says, blues singer Ursa is consumed by her hatred of Corregidora, a 19th century slave master who fathered both her mother and her grandmother. Charged with making generations to bear witness to the abuse embodied in her family name, she finds herself unable to keep this legacy alive when she is made sterile in a violent fight with her husband. So yeah, I think it's about her dealing with womanhood, race. Seems like it has fairly dark themes, so I would maybe look up the trigger warnings before you read this one, but I believe this book inspired Toni Morrison and was originally edited by Toni Morrison as well, and we have a review at the back by James Baldwin too. Next classic I received was Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. This will be my first ever James Baldwin, which I'm so excited for. This is the story of a 14-year-old boy who is the stepson of a minister in a church in Harlem, and I believe this boy is questioning his sexuality or dealing with his sexuality, trying to understand himself and his identity. I believe it's semi-autobiographical, and yeah, I think it's just a story of a young boy dealing with a lot. The idea of sin, who sins, what is sin, all of that I think this book deals with. So I'm super excited about it. I think it also deals with themes of religion, how religion and sexuality maybe intersect and what that means. The next classic I received was I Am a Cat. This one is a Japanese classic. I believe it's actually taught in Japanese schools. And I think it's actually in volumes, so this book I think has all 3 volumes. It's quite a big book. And it's told from the perspective of a cat who roams around this neighborhood, and I believe it basically makes fun of its owner's wife, the people in the neighborhood, the students in the neighborhood, things like that. And yeah, it's meant to be a satirical book, and I believe it makes fun, or it pokes fun at Japanese society just before World War II. So yeah, I've been getting more into Japanese literature recently, and so I'm really excited for this one. I am intimidated by it though, I won't lie. Then the next book I received was On the Road by Jack Kerouac. So the initial reason I wanted this was because it's mentioned in Gilmore Girls, and over the last year or so since I watched Gilmore Girls, I've been trying to read more books read by Rory Gilmore in the show. I don't believe she actually mentioned she read this, but I think in the first episode when they're at Luke's cafe, there's a reference made to this book. I'm not gonna lie, the reviews on Goodreads were pretty poor for this one, but I believe it's basically about this guy. I believe it's semi-autobiographical as well, but it's basically about this guy called Sal Paradise, and along with his companion called Dean Moriarty, I think they essentially road trip or traveled through America. Some sort of commentary about the American dream, about 1950s America, jazz, sex, drugs, all of those things. And I believe Jack Kerouac, and this book was one of the pioneers or defining books of the Beat generation. Then let's move on to non-fiction. So this first one I've actually started reading last night, and that is Tuesdays with Morrie. Again, I think this one was referenced in Gilmore Girls, but yeah, it's essentially about a guy who reconnects with his college professor, maybe 15 years after college, when his professor has been diagnosed with ALS and he doesn't have a long time left to live. So the book basically talks about the conversation between these two men. They meet every Tuesday, I believe, and the older man, the professor, shares his wisdom on life, on death, all things like that, his philosophy. So far, the language in the book is really consumable, so I'm excited to continue this one. The next book I got was Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And I think this book basically looks at gender bias, specifically in data. So, data is obviously used to make important decisions from healthcare, education, policy, all things like that. And I believe how it talks about how the data bias in terms of gender is often overlooked. I've heard a lot of people speak well about this book, and I believe it's quite shocking how poor some of these stats are. I believe it's enraging, but ultimately insightful. Then this non-fiction book I actually hadn't heard of before. It's called The Patient Assassin by Anita Anand. I'm just going to read off the back for this one because I think it explains it quite well. So, hundreds of peaceful civilians were slaughtered in the Amritsar massacre of 13th April in 1919. According to legend, Udham Singh was injured that day and he vowed to take revenge. More than 20 years later, in a Westminster hall, he fulfilled that promise when he gunned down, in cold blood, the man ultimately responsible, Sir Michael O'Dwyer. It basically goes into the years between those two events. And yeah, I'm really interested because I'd never heard about this event or this part of history. It sounds like one of those books where it's non-fiction, but it kind of reads like fiction. I can't remember the name of the book, but kind of like that book about the Chicago Fair. I haven't read it, but I've heard about it, and that's the sort of vibe I'm getting. Then the last non-fiction book was When Breath Becomes Air. It's quite a popular one, I believe. It's about a neurosurgeon who gets diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and I think it follows his life as a neurosurgeon who then has to deal with an illness himself, that sort of paradoxical nature of events. Yeah, and I think he speaks about the meaning of life, human identity, just again, those big sort of questions and experiences we all have. So the last two books I'm going to talk to you about are children's books / younger books. The first one being a graphic novel called Princess Ever After. So this one is by Kate O'Neill. I actually read The Tea Dragon Society by Kate O'Neill, which was really cute. The illustrations were so nice. The story was lovely too. This one I actually read last night in one sitting. It's like super short, so a really quick read, which is actually something I almost don't like about graphic novels. I feel like you never fully, or I never fully actually find myself getting completely absorbed into the world, because by the time it starts it feels like it's pretty much finished, which is a shame. It was cute. I'm not gonna lie, not too much happened in this graphic novel. It is for a younger audience, but the illustrations were pretty nice. Not as nice as the Tea Dragon Society, but I still think it would be a cute book to read to a child. And then the last book of this haul is Rainbow Grey, which is, again, children's fiction. It's essentially about this girl who lives in the sky. Her name's Ray Grey. She lives in the Weatherlands, which is this place up above in the sky, I think. And they're not meant to go down to Earth, but she does. And everyone in this world has magical powers, whereas she doesn't. But after she goes to Earth, she discovers she has something called rainbow magic, which really reminds me of those rainbow magic books from when I was a child. But yeah, I believe she then has to fight off some sort of enemy, you know, that kind of classic story. I love the cover of this. And I believe the book has some cute like nuances or cute little quirky things like cloud cats, which I think you can see in this cover, and weather magic, which I think is a cool concept. So yeah, I'm excited to get to this one, maybe when I just need like a really chilled read. But yeah, that's all from me today. This was my first video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love if you'd subscribe and like this video, and I should have a lot more content coming out soon. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And yeah, bye for now.